The invitation had been quiet. No cameras, no stage. Just a private meeting between two very different men. Jonathan Roumie arrived just after 3 p.m. The place was quiet, an off-grid Tesla property in the hills of Northern California. Birds chirped somewhere in the trees, and a gentle breeze moved through the tall grass. A small boy stood near the edge of the hill, staring up at the clouds. Jonathan recognized him immediately. "Are you X?" he asked gently. The boy looked up, blonde hair catching the sunlight. "Yes," he said, squinting. "Are you the man who plays Jesus?" Jonathan smiled, humbled. "I try to be." Before the boy could respond, a voice called from behind. "Jonathan, thank you for coming." Jonathan turned. Elon Musk walked toward him, extending his hand. "It's my pleasure, Mr. Musk." "Please," Elon said, shaking his hand firmly. "Call me Elon." They sat down on a wooden bench just outside the cabin. The boy lingered nearby, listening. Elon looked at Jonathan for a long moment. "I've been watching your portrayal of Jesus," he said. "It's different from what I expected." Jonathan tilted his head. "Different how?" Elon's eyes squinted slightly, like he was trying to put something fragile into words. "He doesn't feel distant or like a myth. He feels human, real, like someone who could actually sit across from you and listen." "That's how I see him," Jonathan said. "Someone who listens first, and then says just enough to make you think for the rest of your life." There was a pause. Elon glanced toward his son, then back at Jonathan. "Can I ask you something? That might sound strange." "Of course," Jonathan replied. Elon leaned in just slightly, his voice quieter now. "Do you think Jesus would have liked me?" That question. It landed like a drop in still water. Jonathan didn't answer right away. He studied Elon's face, the brilliance behind the eyes, the weariness in the lines around them. "You mean, would he approve of your science, your money, your ambition?" Jonathan asked gently. Elon looked down. "Or maybe, would he see through me, past all of it? Would he see the real me and still say, 'Come closer'?" That's when the boy suddenly spoke. "Dad, remember what you told me when I asked if stars ever feel lonely?" Elon blinked. "Yeah?" "You said maybe they burn so bright because they don't want anyone to know they're sad." Jonathan turned to look at the boy. So did Elon. The breeze paused. The moment froze. "That," Jonathan whispered, "is something Jesus would say." There was silence for a long time. And then Jonathan leaned forward, lowering his voice to a whisper only Elon could hear. "You want to know if he would have liked you?" "Elon, I think he would have loved you. Not because of who you are in the world, but because of who you are in the quiet." Elon stared out at the horizon. His son walked over and took his hand. But Jonathan wasn't done yet. "Can I ask you something now?" he said. "When was the last time you truly felt seen?" Elon didn't answer right away. He looked at the horizon, his fingers lightly squeezing his son's hand. The boy stayed close, resting his head against Elon's arm like he knew something heavy was happening, even if he didn't understand it. "When was the last time I felt seen?" Elon repeated, almost to himself. He let out a slow breath. "Probably when my mom looked at me right after I dropped out of Stanford. She didn't say anything, just hugged me. That kind of silence feels full, you know?" Jonathan nodded. "The kind of silence that says, 'I see your soul, not your status.'" Elon gave a small smile, but his eyes didn't leave the sky. "I don't get that kind of silence anymore. People expect me to be a machine, solve Mars, fix Earth, explain consciousness. But no one ever asks if I'm tired." Jonathan studied him. "Are you?" "Tired?" Elon turned, met his gaze for the first time in minutes. Yes, but not just physically. I'm tired of pretending I don't care. Care about what? Elon hesitated. About whether any of it, actually matters. Rockets, Neuralink, money, Twitter, the noise. Sometimes I wonder if I'm just distracting myself from a much bigger question. Jonathan leaned in softly. Which question? Why do I feel a hole that nothing fills? That question cracked something open in the air. The boy looked up at his father, concern in his innocent blue eyes. Do you mean like a hole in your heart? Elon looked at him, surprised by how simply the boy had said it. Then he nodded. Yeah, like that. Jonathan turned to the boy. What do you think fills that hole? The boy tilted his head, thinking deeply. Maybe love, but the kind that doesn't go away when you're not doing anything special. Jonathan smiled gently. That's the kind Jesus talked about. Elon blinked. What do you mean? I mean, Jonathan said, he didn't come to give us all the answers. He came to show us how to live when we feel like we don't matter. He taught people to look at the outcasts, the forgotten, the doubters, and say, you still belong. You're still loved. Not because of what they did, but despite it. Elon looked down, his fingers tightening around his son's. I used to think love was earned, he whispered, that I had to build something massive just to be worthy of it. Jonathan's voice was tender now. And what if you never had to earn it? Elon didn't speak. His throat moved as if he was swallowing something heavy. Jonathan placed a hand on Elon's shoulder. You're not alone in this, and you're not broken because you're asking. Elon's lips parted, barely a whisper. Then why does it feel like I'm always running from something I can't name? The wind returned. Jonathan looked at him gently. Maybe it's not something you're running from, Elon. Maybe it's someone you're running toward. The words hung in the air like fog, not heavy, but impossible to ignore. Elon turned them over in his mind. Maybe it's someone you're running toward. I don't know how to run toward someone I can't see, he said finally. I'm an engineer, a physicist. I solve problems. I design paths. But faith is like trying to catch wind in your hands. Jonathan nodded slowly. Faith isn't the absence of reason, Elon. It's the willingness to believe there's meaning beyond what reason can measure. Elon's expression shifted, caught somewhere between defensiveness and vulnerability. I've spent my life trying to make sense of the universe, the math, the physics, the systems. But the older I get, the more I feel like the real universe isn't just out there. He pressed his hand to his chest. It's in here, and it scares me. Jonathan didn't blink. What part scares you? The silence, Elon admitted. When I stop moving, when I'm alone, it's like I don't know who I am without the work. His son, still clinging to his hand, looked up at him and said softly, But I know who you are even when you're not working. Elon turned to him, startled. You're my dad. Jonathan smiled, but stayed quiet. The moment didn't need a narrator. I don't think I've ever said this out loud, Elon continued, but sometimes I wonder if God avoids me, like maybe I'm too complicated for him. Jonathan looked directly into Elon's eyes. Elon, you're not too complicated for God. You're just not used to being loved without needing to prove something. Elon looked away, blinking fast. And Jesus, Jonathan said gently, he never asked people to prove themselves. He met them where they were, tired, lost, angry, doubting. He didn't shame them. He walked with them. Elon let out a small laugh, but it was bitter. And where did it get him? Crucified? Jonathan didn't flinch. Yes, but it wasn't the end. There was a pause. Elon's voice came softer now. Do you think he really came back? I do, Jonathan said. but not just physically. I think he comes back every time someone chooses love over power, grace over judgment, silence over noise, humility over ego. Elon looked at him, skeptical, but not dismissive. You really believe that? Jonathan nodded. With all my heart, and not because I read it in a book, but because I've seen what happens when people stop running and start listening. Elon looked down at his son. What do you think I should listen to? He asked him gently. The boy shrugged. Maybe to the voice that sounds like love, even when you feel like you don't deserve it. Jonathan's eyes glistened. Out of the mouths of children, he whispered. Elon wiped at the corner of his eye quickly, almost ashamed of the emotion. I didn't expect this, he murmured. Jonathan smiled. God's voice rarely sounds like what we expect. Elon was quiet now. Something in him had softened, like a tightly wound spring finally allowed to uncoil. I've read every major philosophy, he said, almost mechanically. Nietzsche, Kierkegaard, Camus, Spinoza. They all circle around meaning, but none of them can touch it. Not the kind that makes a person weep in the middle of the night when no one is watching. Jonathan nodded slowly. Because meaning isn't found in concepts. It's found in connection. That's what Jesus kept showing people, through touch, through tears, through meals shared with the forgotten. Elon looked up, brows furrowed. But I've broken things, Jonathan. Hurt people, not always directly. But I've caused pain. Collateral damage in pursuit of progress. Jonathan held his gaze. You think Jesus didn't sit at tables with people like that? With the ones who had blood on their hands and regrets in their chest? There was a pause. The boy, now sitting between them, looked from one man to the other, sensing the weight. Jonathan continued. There's a story Jesus told about a lost sheep. 99 stayed. One wandered off. And instead of saying, forget it, the shepherd left the 99 to find the one. Elon blinked. Doesn't make sense statistically. Exactly, Jonathan said. It only makes sense if love is more valuable than efficiency. That hit Elon hard. He looked down, jaw clenched. But what if I'm too far from the flock? What if I'm the sheep that wandered into the dark and forgot how to come back? Jonathan reached into his coat and pulled something out. A small, simple wooden carving. A shepherd holding a lamb. I keep this in my pocket when I feel like I'm drifting, he said, because it reminds me, it's not about me finding God. It's about letting God find me. Elon took the carving, holding it in his hand like it was a piece of something ancient. He stared at it for a long moment. His son spoke softly. Dad, what if Jesus isn't mad at you? What if he's just waiting? That question cracked something wide open. Elon set the carving down on his lap and covered his face with one hand, not dramatically, quietly. A gesture of a man who was no longer running, but not yet ready to stop crying either. Jonathan didn't speak. He just reached out and placed a steady hand on Elon's shoulder. No preaching, no pressure, just presence. You don't have to believe everything today, he said gently. But maybe just believe that you're not beyond love. Elon lowered his hand, eyes red but open. I want to believe that. I don't know how. Jonathan gave a small, steady smile. You don't have to know how. You just have to say yes to being found. And for the first time in a long time, Elon Musk didn't argue. He simply nodded. The silence that followed was no longer hollow. It was healing. Elon sat back, his eyes tracing the ridges of the wooden shepherd in his lap. His son leaned into him, calm and present, like he had always belonged in this moment. because he had. Jonathan glanced at them both. "It's strange," he said softly, "how the most brilliant minds can still be searching for the simplest truths." Elon smiled faintly, without irony. "You mean like being loved for nothing?" "Exactly," Jonathan said. "No innovation required, no resume, just a heart that's still beating." Elon looked at his son. "That's why kids get it so easily. They haven't learned how to fake it yet." "Or calculate the cost of being real," Jonathan added. Elon nodded, then asked, "What do you think Jesus would say to someone like me? Someone who doubts, questions, builds systems to control the unknown?" Jonathan looked at him with a gentle certainty. "I think he'd say, 'Bring it all to me. Your doubts, your genius, your fear. I'm not threatened by your questions. I gave you that mind. But now, I want your heart." Elon was quiet, then chuckled under his breath. "My heart is a mess." "Perfect," Jonathan said. "That's where Jesus did his best work." The boy looked up again. "What kind of work?" Jonathan turned to him and smiled. "The kind where people start to feel again. The kind where tears are okay. The kind where dads remember they're more than what they build." Elon was still staring at the wooden shepherd. "It's wild. I've created machines that think, cars that drive themselves, rockets that land on their own legs. But I can't design peace. I can't engineer rest." "Peace doesn't come through control," Jonathan said. "It comes through surrender." "That word always made me uncomfortable," Elon admitted. "Surrender. It sounds like losing." Jonathan shook his head. "No, not when it's to love. Then it's the beginning of winning something deeper, something permanent." Elon glanced down, then back up. "And what if I'm not ready for all the belief stuff? The Bible, the stories, the miracles? What if I just want to feel something real again?" Jonathan leaned in. "Then start there. Jesus didn't ask for perfect belief. He asked for honesty. And you've already brought more honesty to this conversation than most people ever do." Elon looked up at the sky, eyes scanning the endless blue. "I want to know him, not the version people argue over, not the one used to divide people. I want to know the Jesus who listens when the noise is gone." Jonathan nodded, his voice now barely above a whisper. "That's the only one that matters." The boy tugged at Elon's sleeve. "Can we pray?" Elon's eyes widened. "I don't even know how." Jonathan smiled. "You don't need the words, just the willingness." Elon paused, then closed his eyes. And for the first time in years, he stopped thinking. He just listened. Elon's eyes were closed. The wind rustled the trees like they were gently clapping for something unseen. No one spoke. Even the birds seemed to wait. Jonathan watched silently, sensing it. That fragile, sacred moment when a soul opens just enough to let light in. Elon whispered, barely audible, "I don't know if you're real, but if you are, I'm listening." His son squeezed his hand, and just like that, a single tear slid down Elon's cheek. Not a tear of pain, not even one of joy, but one of release. Like something had been held inside him for decades and finally found permission to leave. Jonathan spoke softly, eyes still closed. Jesus never asked people to be perfect. He asked them to be present. He didn't say, "Understand everything." He said, "Follow me, even if your feet are shaking." Elon opened his eyes slowly. "Why does that make me feel like I'm finally home?" "Because the truth always feels familiar," Jonathan said, "even when you've never heard it spoken like this before." Elon looked at the shepherd carving again, then handed it back to Jonathan. "Keep it," Jonathan said, "or give it to someone else when they're lost. That's how this kind of love works. It passes on. There was a long pause before Elon finally spoke again. I thought my purpose was to reach Mars. Maybe it still is. But now I wonder if the real mission was always to return to myself first. Jonathan smiled. And maybe Jesus isn't trying to pull you away from the stars. Maybe he's just reminding you that the creator of galaxies still wants your heart more than your spaceship. That made Elon chuckle through his emotion. I never thought faith could feel this calm. Faith doesn't shout, Jonathan replied. It whispers. You just have to be still enough to hear it. The boy climbed up onto Elon's lap, his tiny fingers tracing the sleeve of his shirt. Do you think Jesus can be proud of someone even if they're still learning who he is? Elon looked at him, eyes moist again. I think that's the whole point. Jonathan stood up, brushing off his coat. I should go, but before I do, he reached into his bag and pulled out a simple, worn Bible. This isn't a book of rules. It's a book of rescue. Open it when you're ready, not to figure it all out, but to find someone who already knows everything about you and still says, come. Elon took the Bible like it was glass. He nodded, grateful, words failing him. Jonathan turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Elon? Yeah? Don't be surprised if the more you listen, the more you cry. Sometimes that's how God waters the soul. Elon looked down at his son, then back at the Bible, then out at the trees. One tear, one prayer, one turning, and somewhere in that stillness, Jonathan Roumie walked away with tears in his own eyes, because he knew Jesus had just found a rocket scientist